Hello and the warmest of welcomes to this another episode of Rambling Reviews right here on Mason's Music Library. I'm your host Carl Mason, and in this week's exciting episode we're going to be discussing one of the most psychedelic and transcendental albums ever produced, and that's Bitches Brew by the jazz legend Miles Davis. So without further ado, let's get straight into the review. Now, Miles Davis was always one to push the boundaries of his musical creation. With all his previous projects, such as the legendary album Kind of Blue, he always approached with just the most incredible understanding. And with every new project came a new innovation in his approach, and nowhere is this more apparent than with Bitches Brew. This album saw some of the most progressive innovations, not only for jazz fusion, but for music as a whole. An example of this would be the band lineup he worked with, often having multiple drummers in the mix, something that we see now from jazz artists such as Kamasi Washington and his band The Next Step, but for this time it was really a very different, especially how they panned each drummer to different speakers, making for a really psychedelic listening experience in which headphones are a must, as the panning of sound effects enchant the listener into a legitimate jazz trance. Take for example this section of the song Spanish Keys. For me, that's just such a visceral sonic experience. Something that is not, I'm sure it's not for everyone, but what's important to appreciate is that your ear is a muscle, and listening to this kind of music is like taking your ears weightlifting. The beauty for me about this album is the quality of the musicians involved in this project, because with this album it's easy to get lost behind the wall of sound, but it's not till you take a step back can you really hear how each individual perfectly works together in the band. For example, on the song Bitches Brew, and how the band moved together so tightly throughout the drastic different dynamic directions of the song. And this song is over 26 minutes long. Now let that sink in for a second. 26 minutes and 12 musicians all acting as one. Now that for me is just staggering to think about, but it just goes to show the level of craftsmanship and understanding and connection that all these fine men had. So the aim, it would seem, with this album was to see how far the boundaries of experimentation and improvisation could be pushed, with the focus in recording being on the pure collaboration and harmonisation of each band member, and less on some overarching pre-established vision that Miles had before entering the studio. Now, it's not to say that this album wasn't extremely well thought out, but it's more that it's like controlled chaos, and it appears that this controlled chaos approach is what helped lead Miles and his friends to make such an intriguing sound and style. And whilst we're talking about style, I have to briefly talk about the album artwork for this project, as for me it's one of the most captivating album covers ever. Now, I'm not sure where to start beginning unpacking the imagery behind this piece, because I'm not an art critic, I'm a music critic, but to me it speaks of the coming storms, and when we face these coming storms with strength and love, we gain from them understanding and insight. I mean, this image in particular just screams to me insight and faith. But again, I'm not an art critic, and both with this project and the artwork, individuals will paint their own meaning onto it. It's just, for me, I feel it represents the calm that comes after the storm. Okay, so now before I begin wrapping up this week's episode of Rambling Reviews, I just want to discuss my own 3 personal highlights from this incredible album. Firstly being the album opening track, the 20-minute long masterpiece, Pharaoh's Dance. A truly transportative and transcendent track that initially submerges the listeners into the sound of his album, bringing us into the Bitches Brew dimension with those high-tempo drums that infiltrate your mind state instantly, beckoning you in to what will be a real sonic trip. The next highlight for me is a song that I probably listen to the most from this album, and that's John McLagan. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But it's not that it's necessarily the best song or anything, it's just that I feel myself returning to this song so much, honestly, because it's the shortest cut from this album, at around only 4:20 minutes long in length. And With this time, the band are able to cover so much remarkable ground. I also feel that it's so representative of the sound of this project, and if you were just looking to dip your toes into the sound of this album, this song would be a great start for you. And in fact, I'm going to play it for you right now. So let me know in the comments what you think. Okay, so for my final personal highlight from Brew, it's one of the more subdued songs from this album, the aptly named Sanctuary, a song that is found almost at the end of this project, and it has a real grounding effect in the context of this album, as it returns the listener to a more smooth, traditional jazz sound, almost being reminiscent of some of Miles' older albums. In this way, it does feel a little bit like a sanctuary after the chaotic and often at times dizzying sonic experience that is this album. This again brings me back to what I view the concept behind this album to be, which is about facing the storms and hardships of life that test us all, the chaos if you will. But it's how you face these storms that defines your character, as after the night comes the dawn, and after the dark comes the light. But again, we all paint our own meanings onto art, which is, for me, what makes it so important. Okay, so that's unfortunately going to have to do it for this week's episode of Rambling Reviews here on Mason's Music Library. Miles Davis is one of those artists that I appreciate the most from the world of jazz. Brew is just such a special album that I just had to make a review for it. And I would love to know your thoughts on this album, so why not drop me a line in the comment section down below. And if you would like to pick up your own vinyl copy of this album, then I also have a link for you down in the description of this video. But before you head out today, I have this week's recommended listening list for you, just a few songs that nicely complement this project. Starting out with Changing of the Guard by the one and only Kamasi Washington, and next up is the tumultuous song Vital Transformation by the Maravishu Orchestra. And last but by no means least is So What by the marvellous Miles Davis. So thank you once again for joining me here on Mason's Music Library. I've been your host, Carl Mason, and it's been my utmost pleasure as always. Now if you enjoyed this album review and would like to see more classic album discussions, then subscribe to the channel. I'm sure you know how much I would appreciate it. Also check out my Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, all linked down in the description of this video. Cheers, take it easy, and I'll see you in the next episode of Rambling Reviews.